Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. This is the Central Ohio Stormwater Roundtable for this is kind of like quarter two, I guess, of our presentation. So I hope you joined us last time for the first one. We did wetlands. I'm going to do a little recap of that because I think it does apply here to what we're talking about today, which is post-construction. This has been something that's becoming more of interest. I think you're going to see more of that with coming audits from EPA. It's time to really start looking at post-construction and getting those programs underway and really in place. I do want to mention our partners. They are the ones that help us bring you content like this and help with other programs like post-construction to communities as well. So thank you again to our partners. So very quickly, just want to go over some upcoming events in the region that we're featuring. We've got CWP webinars and coalition membership. Those, you know, they've changed their membership structure a little bit, so where you can still purchase them for $150 or something like that to see those webinars. We have a membership. We are able to share that content with members. So feel free to join our coalition membership at no cost to you. It's just a matter of getting an email from you. You're more than willing to share that. You know, if you've got a room and you want to do a training event, you can share that at your facility. We just need the one email that's going to kind of tie that link to your site. So consider that. The other thing we have is the XCal visual training opportunities. This again is another kind of a structured membership that we're offering out to our partners. If you have staff that you need annual training for, there's a lot of different training modules in this XCal setup. The Stormwatch video is one of those. There's materials on IDDE, several other things that I don't recall, but there's quite a few.
There's a lot of topics, yes.
There's a lot of topics. And I think that's something that's coming up. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about the permitting, what's changing in the permits, the need for that training or that need for specific training, which IDDE is one of those specific training modules that has come up recently in the permit language. Southwest Ohio's got their Stormwater Field Day coming up, September 23rd. That's been gone for a while, but it's back, and it was always a very good opportunity to see BMPs in the field application and learn from some of the best down there. They've been doing it a while. They have a lot of programs related to sediment erosion control, so I highly recommend it if you have the opportunity and the want to go get that kind of training. Ohio Stormwater Awareness Week, I want to bring that up, October 17th through the 23rd. This is our regional effort to engage communities and residents in some of that education that is needed for MCM 1 and 2 of the permits. I encourage you to join in that partnership. Take a look at the Ohio Stormwater Week. It has a toolbox of items that you can use, such as like a resolution that you can take to your city councils to pass, you know, observing the day or the week. There's a link to the Imagine a Day Without Water, which is a national event that happens that Wednesday of that week. That's another way of participating. But it's again, a mechanism for everyone to join in, to get that broad outreach, to do that regional effort, and to meet some of your requirements for MCM 1 and 2. So here's a little bit of today's agenda. We're working through those opening remarks. I want to talk about some recent changes in permitting that affect post-construction, and we'll look. I know we've seen a lot or had a lot of presentations on permit changes, but this is going to specifically focus on what affects post-construction. So that's what we'll be looking at a little bit today. Municipal compliance efforts. You know, what have communities been doing? What have we been doing in particular? That's what I'm going to pull a lot of my experience from working with MS4s and what we've seen with post-construction. And then some resources that you can use, and again, discussion and questions. This is your roundtable. I encourage you to ask questions. You know, if there's something you don't understand, you know, put it in the question box, but this is your opportunity to really ask. You know, this is a partnership, and that coordination with everyone and getting that voice out and hearing what everybody has to say about this is important. I don't want to be the one up here ranting and raving on my issues, but let's talk about everything. So with that, I think we can get started. And like I said, I wanted to tie this back to last roundtable. You know, we talked about wetlands in particular, and the environmental services of wetlands and the need to protect and look at those. And when we're talking about post-construction, you know, wetlands are really nature's post-construction, and we're trying to emulate those processes. And what are those processes? I love this Ohio water budget graph. You know, it really shows what we need to do when we're emulating natural processes. You can see that precipitation, you know, we've got 38 inches hitting the ground. What happens to that? Well, there's a large branch that goes into that unsaturated zone, passes through that, and there's a large percentage of that that goes into evapotranspiration. You know, I think that's something we really need to focus on and be cognizant of when we're thinking about emulating natural processes. What happens when we pave that? Well, there you go. We're taking those big branches, that contact with the soil, that function of the soil, and we're changing that and converting that into runoff. So GI, like I said, you know, that's green infrastructure, low impact, tons of, you know, the alphabet soup and what you want to call it, but it really comes down to that emulating natural hydrology. And so let's kind of take a look at where we're at with that emulating natural hydrology. This is an example. This is in the Darby, you know, with the Darby appendix to the permit. There's an infiltration requirement. I think this is a great thing that we need to look at across the board, and how do we get that infiltration requirement? That is something that's really important to that natural hydrology, emulating that. So we have here typical scenario, you know, large ag field that has been under agriculture for a while. You can see the dark staining in the soils. You know, that's let me put on the next one. Those are hydric soils, you know, and that hydric soil really acts as, this is retention. This is, you know, disconnecting the storm events from the hydro period of that event. So it's holding water. This is a field capacity, you know, of these soils that is very high. Some of these soils are up to 40% field capacity. It's what makes them such great agricultural areas. Is, you know, they're very resistant to drought because of that added ability to hold water. So this is the location of the new school complex in the Darby. You can see the high school, which has been there for about 10 years. We've got a new elementary school that's been developed just in the past few years next to it. But so now here we have a Darby example of development. If we look, let me see if I can zoom in here. So compared to the hydric soils that are on the site, we're now looking at the practices that were built to handle that infiltration amount. looking at some of these basins, you know, particularly this large basin down here, you can see it's pretty much, it's all open water. That really was designed to be more like this one up here, which if I can zoom in, let's see if we can zoom into this one. What you can see is that's somewhat of an open channel. Water is supposed to flow through here. It's got separation with some you know, shallow water areas. This is where the rest of this hydric soil and tile system comes into the system itself. But it does show the characteristics that the rest of these should be showing. This one is not getting the input from the stormwater as much as the rest of the system is. And what's happening is this system has staged up consistently throughout the years. It doesn't exhibit the pathways and the flow channels that should be in those, but it consistently stays higher, staged up. This lower basin here, let me go back to the lower basin where the outfall, the ultimate outfall for the site has been staged up so high that we never see those channels or that vegetation. In fact, we can't grow vegetation in there like was planned. And I think that's due because of the temporal change in the hydrology. You know, we get ice cover on that area. We get storm events during the winter that float the ice and it pulls plants out of the ground. So this pond has consistently been mud flat for going on 10 years now. We can't get anything to grow in there. I've tried some different things and it doesn't work. So that's looking at, you know, I think we can do better on the infiltration requirements. I'd be more than happy to talk to EPA when we come up. We've got a new permit, you know, construction general permit will come up in 23. And I think we can do better on how we do the approach on some of these areas. Just an example, I just wanted to mention that and like I said, go through that and talk a little bit about that. Again, I presented this last time about soil moisture drives year-to-year change in carbon uptake. You know, a lot more research is going into soil health and managing carbon as a way of, you know, looking at systems and trying to get sustainable practices in the ground. You know, slowing climate change rooted in trees. Again, here's this need to really get that living component, you know, not only the soil component, the soil health, but getting that living component into our stormwater practices as well. When you start looking around and seeing some of how these are getting implemented, you know, we've got bioretention cells. Here's a commercial site that's got some of that aspect to it. You know, how do we monitor and maintain these? This is something that's going to come up with post-construction, but this is how we go about emulating those natural processes, you know, starting to think about what we do for stormwater and how we make these sites work. I like this example only because it's a dual use. You know, not only is it just that parking island that every parking lot has to have because of you know, tree requirements for zoning or something of that, but it's also a dual use for, you get your stormwater, you get a little pavement disconnect, you do something different than what we have been doing. You get into practices like green roofs. You know, this is going to be something that comes up as we look at those distributed practices. You know, how do we monitor and maintain these in the long term? Something like this that's a little more out of sight and out of mind. You know, if we're starting to look at these for stormwater purposes and permitting purposes, this is part of your post-construction O&M, and you will need to be making sure that this is working in perpetuity. So that's my little overview from last time. I think we've got a poll question. You want to push that out? And if there's any other questions now, you know, feel free to take a moment, get in the chat box, add some things in there. I would like you to use the poll questions. helps us help you by really looking at the engagement of this throughout the presentation. These are spaced, approximately a quarter way through, so we'll be looking at how our engagement is throughout the presentation. So I do appreciate your using that. Like I say, feel free to ask questions during this period too, and I'll give a few minutes for the results to come in.
Yeah, and as people are doing that, I'll take a minute to just do one more little good housekeeping reminder. We are recording today's event, and I will be sending out the recording link and additional resources about a week from today. So look for that with certificates as well. If you are interested in a certificate, you might notice in Zoom sometimes the names, participant names look a little different. If you are interested, I would just ask that maybe you look to rename your name with just, if it's so that you have a first name and maybe your last initial, just something that's a little bit more recognizable to how you registered. That'll help me out a little bit as I put together certificates. But so that was my little reminder there. It looks like we're getting quite a few polls coming in there. Maybe capped out there, 80% of the people have voted.
Looks like we're about half and half
And
on
that and
post-construction.
So Sharon there. Okay.
Yeah, so I think there, really is a lot of questions from people about post-construction and where a program goes. How do we accomplish this? So thank you for that. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about the recent permits and that have come out and some of the municipal programs that are going on. I hope you all know the new MS4 permit came out April 1st. So that is effective right now. If you haven't read it, I would suggest you take a look at it. I think that's part of the resources that we have available for you. But do take a look at it, understand that, know the ins and outs of it. I know it can be really dry reading, but some of the changes and some of the things that come out in it are important to programs. And we'll be looking at exactly what that is relative to the post-construction section, which number 5, post-construction stormwater management and new and redevelopment. You see, I started with F, section F, which is the performance standards. There's the A, B, C, D, and E that you need to comply with as well. And I hope you all are familiar with the permit language anyway. Those sections really apply to your program and how you implement it. It should really kind of match your construction program, which should already be in place. You need to have the legal authority. You need to have the review of plans aspect. You need to have that site inspection aspect of it as well. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts in that first part of the post-construction. Again, like I say, that should already be in place. If you're reviewing construction plans, post-construction for NOI sites is always part of that construction. So you should already be reviewing post-construction. The site inspection aspect of it. You should be already including O&M plans with your reviews. So a lot of that is already there. Something that's new to the permit and that was new to all these sections is the performance standards. That was fleshed out quite a bit more throughout the permit as far as each section and what those performance standards are. So this performance standard, because of the inclusion of the TMDL standards, which if you haven't looked, take a look at Appendix A in the permit and see what in your community you have for TMDLs. That Appendix A is what's going to be making the rest of these applicable to your program. So with that said, looking at the TMDL performance standards, if you have the suspended solids or sediment and siltation, phosphorus, nitrogen, ammonia, any of the nutrients, which, kind of goes across the board for the most part. If you have a TMDL in your location, you will be having a post-construction program that shall provide. So A there, which is in addition to parts 3B1 and 3B2, which is the educational opportunities, they're looking for that opportunity to contractors, SWP3 designers, and employees for Table 4B practices, which are those green infrastructure type practices. And so what's curious about this permit is what is not in there was the actual, in the education component, there used to be a theme directed towards developers, which is no longer in that educational aspect. So having that one theme directed at development has kind of been moved into this post-construction aspect, which is now looking at that opportunity to present green infrastructure to these folks. So I think that's a worthwhile change, but it is kind of contained in the post-construction, and it is under the performance standards for areas that are identified with a TMDL. With that said, what we're doing, our approach is to pretty much address TMDL situations across the board with any of our outreach material, making sure that we're paying attention to that and trying to educate our participants with that information on what that TMDL standard might mean. So we're still looking at individual locations, but we're also really applying this across the board in our educational outreach on those practices. We look at B, C, D, and E. These are something that get into that idea of really retrofitting or applying those practices within your watersheds that have, these are impaired watersheds. Their EPA is looking for some improvements in that watershed. So retrofit one existing stormwater practice that solely provides peak discharge function to meet that performance standard for extended detention. 300 linear feet of stream restoration, or install a Table 4B practice to treat a minimum of 1 acre of existing impervious. Probably the easy lift here is the update your ordinance or other regulatory mechanisms to require Table 4B practices or other green infrastructure practices where feasible. I think a lot of communities have already got that by referencing compliance with the construction general permit, but you may want to take a look at that and see what may need to be done as far as getting those aspects into your program. The end of that section says these TMDL performance standards may be implemented outside your jurisdictional boundary, but shall be implemented within the identified TMDL project watershed in Appendix A. This is really quite a great thing because now we're looking at watershed-wide practices. This can allow a community to perhaps fund a project that's outside of their community that helps to improve that impaired watershed. I think this is a good step forward in looking at that watershed scale improvements. We can't do everything a lot of times in that individual community. Now, I know I've had some service directors make the comment, we're going to be hard pressed to spend some of our stormwater utility fee outside of our community. And that may be a case, and that may be something that needs to be overcome. But I think the first thing to do is to start understanding those TMDLs, what the impacts are. General public doesn't understand a lot of times what runoff from somewhere is doing to someplace else. We're seeing that with Gulf Coast hypoxia. What does Central Ohio have to do with Gulf Coast hypoxia? Why should we fix something here for something that's down there? It's those kind of issues that I see, especially in small communities where folks are losing stream bank areas, having water issues locally, those kind of things. It becomes a real educational type thing that we have to look at and achieve that understanding. Also wanted to talk about federal permits. So the proposed 2022 construction general permit is coming up. They are requesting comments, or the comment period ended here this week actually. But the new construction general permit will come up for federal projects. The intent of this, at least showing everybody here, is that they really set the bar for the states that have the authority for their permits. So whatever changes occur in here will be reflected in our 2023 permit as well. It will have to meet that requirement. So looking at this as a way of kind of, taking a look at the future, what's coming down the pike, what might happen, and what's in here. So a lot of that, this is from their fact sheet. It's 138 pages. So I hopefully tried to condense their fact sheet a little bit. It's pretty comprehensive, but some of the summary changes, they've got changes to clarify the permit. So there's a lot of language that they just wanted to clean up and make changes. There's some added specificity that they're proposing as well. But then what they're really looking for mostly was this request for comments. And these sections are really something that they are asking for those comments about. And the only one that I kind of focused on here that applies to post-construction, so they were requesting whether to modify the definition of operator to specifically include parties that determine acceptance of work and pay for work performed. So when I look at this, what I read into this is things that may be going into like local petition ditch process, may be ultimately part of the MS4. These kinds of situations would be tied in at the beginning of construction as being an operator. I know we don't accept post-construction until the very end of it and hold bond back to make sure that it's as constructed. So we do have that mechanism in place to enforce that, but there may be instances where this kind of opens up exposure to engineering firms, who knows? That language is kind of broad-based. It might be something to consider looking at, and we'll see what happens as far as what the final document comes out and how that might play down in the changes in our construction general permit in 2023. Like I said, the comment period ended July 12th. So you missed out on making comments, but it might be worth something to watch in the future to see where that goes. All right, Brooke, I'm at poll question 2.
All right. So this one has a few more options there. I think I have it set to you can select multiple options out of this list, but just kind of curious to see how people felt, different components of post-construction. What do you feel like could be improved upon within your current program, or where do you feel like the most challenging aspects lie?
The multiple choice will give you a few more minutes on this one.
Yeah, because there's quite a bit going on there. I have a feeling where I think most people are going to click, but I wanted to try to include as many. I hope I got all mostly the main components there. So just to kind of dig a little more into the weeds. So I have posted a few of the links and resources Dave has just mentioned. I don't see any questions in the chat box there, but if anyone has questions, like I said, feel free to put them in the chat box or just unmute yourself if you'd like while we're doing the poll question here.
Yep, feel free to butt in and talk over me, because like I say, I tend to go on. So it looks like O&M plans are kind of going up there, ensuring that.
Mhm.
They updated when ownership changes. Yep. Performing inspections. Yeah, that looks to be up there as well.
Mhm. A little bit more time here. See if we can get close to our 80% voted from last time.
I think I'd probably agree with that. Ensuring the O&M plans and the, are in place and updated when ownership changes. That administrative part is probably, we'll talk a little bit about that down the road here. But I do think that's something that to really look at.
Right. Okay, we've hit our 80%. Oh, there's another one. All right, gonna end this and share the results with everybody. So that's kind of where majority that, is talking about that O&M. Yeah, definitely adequate staffing, TMDLs, inspections. That's kind of where I expected most of the.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. That's where I would have, that's where I struggle probably the most too, is with those items as well.
All right, let's stop sharing that.
So let's talk a little bit about programs and what are people doing. I've got a little video here. The vast majority of what we have currently is ponds, and ponds need to be, looked at back to 2003 according to permit and post-construction. A lot of these we don't have information for. A lot of these we don't have plans for. A lot of these we aren't sure what they were intended for. So there's a lot of data, a lot of information that needs to be gathered. Let me play this little clip here. Show you an example of something we're trying out. That's Chad Luck from Fairfield. I don't know if he's on the call or not. I hope he signed the release to use his image. I guess you don't see his face, so we don't know who he is. What he's using here is the Hydrone. This is a GPS sonar device that we can track and watch and take data for. Oops. And this is kind of the raw data that we get looking at the ponds here. So something that we have struggled with is how do we gather data for ponds? You've got to bring in survey, you got to look at those water depths, you got to compare them to the as-built if you have them, and determine what kind of volume is left in that pond. You can see this will do some pretty extensive coverage of the ponds. You can set this how and where you want it to take data, pretty much cover the ponds. One of the issues you see on the left-hand pond there is algae. If the algae gets too thick, the Hydrone has a real problem getting through there. And we do have that issue to overcome on situations like that. But at least we can get an idea of depth. There's still a lot of post-processing of this data that needs to happen. You need to have that tied to survey, or you need to have that tied to existing water elevations. Looking at the structure information and what was required out of this pond. So this is something we're looking at as a method for one of our communities, partner communities, and trying to determine, what's the best pond to maintain. First off, the capital expenditures in dredging a pond is expensive. There's a lot to that. Looking at that algae pond, is there a reason to dredge that one or do some kind of management there first. You know, a lot of times these are complaint driven by area residents. So looking at a way of assessing ponds, where's the need, what is the biggest bang for your buck, basically. You know, how do we assess these ponds is a real issue right now. Little bit less expensive method for looking at pond depths. This is, I actually bought one of these iBobbers. It's a Bluetooth connection to your phone. You can quickly go out and cast this in a pond, and that's what you're seeing to the right there is an actual pond bottom that I recorded. Fairly accurate. You know what this was? This is a cross section of a outfall area, and what you're seeing is about a couple of berms, couple feet high, you know, maybe 4 or 5 feet wide. From the outflow of that pipe, you know, that we're collecting sediments along there, kind of creating their own little submerged channel right there. See, that's only in about 5-6 feet of water, but it gives you a pretty rapid assessment of a site, you know, of a pond. If you've got the information, you know what the pond depth is supposed to be, you could go drop this out there, take a look at what the pond depth is, and make that quick assessment. So really my point here is, you know, the level of detail that you need for assessing whether these ponds, whether these BMPs are working or not. It may require quite a bit of information to really determine, is it working as intended? That's a very subjective thing, and trying to make that in an objective way, you know, we really need to look at those ways of observing these, determining that it does meet the plan and that it's built according to plan and working as should. So I'm going to just go through some examples of some practices, you know, and for your consideration, and consider how you might monitor and maintain these. You know, this is a spreader swale off of a pavement disconnect that actually goes to the area to the right of the screen, the grassed area. So what's important here is not only that runoff, you know, that rock channel there, but how that spreader swale functions into that grass buffer strip that's along there. You know, is that grass buffer strip being mowed or maintained, or should it be mowed or maintained? You know, those are the kind of questions that you need to be able to answer if you're doing an inspection on this. This is Howlett Hall green roof. You know, that is another aspect of distributed practices that we may get into when we're talking about post-construction controls. How do you monitor this? How do you make sure this is working? You know, is this just a, hey, the plants are growing, coverage is good, things are great. You know, is it there? Or do we need to monitor this for, you know, a discharge rate, and look at what kind of infiltration, what kind of evapotranspiration do we get? Those are the kind of monitoring questions that I have for inspection purposes in the long term when I look at these different BMPs. Here's an example of a treatment train. You know, not only is this one practice, this is more like 3 practices. You've got a blue roof off of the rooftops. You've got surface areas that contain pervious pavers. You have grass, and you have vegetated areas that act as rain gardens. If you look at this view here, this is an under pavement view of what's going on in that area. You can see there's actually a storage chamber underneath. There's exfiltration trenches that run out to the side in the grassed areas. That's what you see installed here. And then you have a vegetated area zone where you have a mix that is hydrated to the point that it discharges up. What we've done is create more of a, you know, a vadose zone for those plants, so they grow well. They don't have their roots soaking wet, but they do have that opportunity to get some water. But this treatment train has a lot going on in it, and looking at that and making sure that that is working properly, especially if this is applied to post-construction aspects, is going to take some data, some memory, and some knowledge on what's going on with these sites. Underground chambers, we're seeing a lot more use of this. These are widespread for commercial sites because of the ability to put those underneath pavement. You know, it really is your pond without your pond. So I encourage the use of these. I don't think they're bad. I do think the problem might be, though, the inspection aspect of it. You can see how large these chambers are. You know, they usually have the covered chambers that you see, the one that's being covered here, and the one that's in this one installed here with the black covering on it. Those are usually the manifolds where you're going to have the majority of your sediments drop out that need to be maintained fairly regularly. These other chambers, you know, this should be basically clean water entering these chambers and soaking in through that gravel base and getting into the ground. Lifespan on those, I don't know. I would hope it's in the 75 to 100-year range if they're maintained properly. But there is that out of sight, out of mind problem with these, and how do we inspect those? We as a district have a hard time inspecting something like this. You know, we don't have access to cameras. Well, I say we don't have access. We do through the drainage engineer. We could actually do something like that, and that's another area I expect we'll get involved with as local drainage engineers, county drainage engineers. But looking at these and approving these for acceptance, you know, there's a lot going on there. At least construction phase, you can check to see that it's been cleaned, it's ready for that post-construction operation. But when you come back to check that, you know, you're going to have to be looking down those inspection ports and seeing what's there. You know, they're so long and linear, you're going to need a camera to really look down through them to see if there's areas that are collecting sediment. It's going to take some knowledge of these, and we need to really develop that workforce for understanding what these take. This one here, you know, if you notice the excavated material here, it's sitting on some great infiltrating soils. I don't think it's discharged once, regardless of storm event, because it really has some infiltrating potential to it. And it's working overly well. I threw this in here for just looking at installation practices. This one kind of baffled me. I didn't have any knowledge of this in the first place, so it was a matter of kind of taking a look at it and going back through the plans to see what I could determine from this. So what you have here from the left is the discharge from an underground storage unit. You see the little 4-inch pipe down below that is actually the underdrain for the gravel bed that system sits on. Then you have a 12-inch orifice plate in the middle of the structure with a 12-inch outlet pipe that leaves ultimately that connects to the MS4. So, you know, when I looked at this, I kind of didn't understand what the need for the 12-inch orifice plate was, because you got a 12-inch pipe there, which acts as the orifice plate. Perhaps it's the height of the orifice that makes that structure actually work. But then I thought, well, you know, I'm sure the designer didn't plan for the underdrain to be submerged all the time. That the position of that orifice plate really makes that underdrain superfluous. I wouldn't have installed an underdrain system in that if that was the case. There's no need for that if you're going to stage that up to that orifice before you discharge this. So it's things like that that are a little baffling on some of the installations. There are field changes that are made on these that you have to be aware of. This one, you know, the as-built that was submitted was basically elevations shot on the top of casting for this. So I had to post-process this data by taking measurements here, going back to the office, kind of looking at what that top of casting elevation was, and figuring out where these elevations were with all the appurtenants that go into that catch basin. So, like I say, not a simple solution. The simplest solution is during construction and installation, making sure that these are done per plan. And that's where I hope everybody's post-construction program is at this phase, is during construction, and at the end of that construction phase, you're making sure that these post-construction devices are installed per plan. And you have that O&M, you have that data available to really assess these down the road. Again, here's just another structure. You know, it's the minor details that really count here. This again is we're separating the underground chamber from, you know, larger events, but the little half circle of PVC there, you see a couple of holes and notches in it. That's your water quality structure drawdown right there that works to meet the requirements of the plan. So if you don't have those elevations, if you don't know what's going on, it can be difficult to really assess if this is working or not. Poll question 3.
Ooh, okay. There.
Are you inspecting post-construction stormwater control measures? This will be an interesting one. I know we've had a lot of new post-construction. And I guess when I think about this question, something that I ask myself is, okay, are we talking about post-construction, or are we talking about at the end of construction when we're reviewing those plans? I like the "isn't that someone else's responsibility."
Yeah, I had to throw it in there, and I'm glad that a couple people have clicked on that.
Yeah, I'm glad too. I mean, it's a valid response.
Yeah. Oh, shoot.
So if you do have any more questions, feel free. We will have some time at the end here that I'll open it up for discussion as well. And like I said, we usually don't run. We've got this scheduled for 2 hours. You know, usually an hour and some is sufficient for this. So we respect your time and your, you know, Zoom fatigue. We don't want to do that to you as well. We will work through this and not try to meet our 2-hour goal.
So there's our results.
So yes, on behalf of MS4s, or on behalf of, yeah. So I suspected that was the majority of what we had going as well. I do think thinking that somebody else is responsible for that. And in respect to that, you know, there is that aspect that some of this is the owner's responsibility to be checking on. But bear in mind, the permit has that third-party inspection aspect to it. This permit term, that language was really kind of honed in on in the permit. So how are you going to supply that third-party inspection? You know, whether that's done through, you know, private firms, you do it in-house. That's something that your program is going to have to take a look at, and how you do that. And that brings us to our resources and components. You know, what are you going to do? How's your program do that? So let's talk a little bit. Inspection checklist. That's been a big one, you know, in these performance standards in the new permit. Checklist. Have an objective way of reviewing and ensuring you're checking some of these things. So whether that's programs, you know, you've got a lot of the MS4 tracker programs out there. We're looking at some in-house things to do on ways to track this information as well. Look at, I recommend, so post-construction, look at the ODOT L&D manual, volume 2 manual. They've got some good guidance documents in there. You know, they're spending a lot of our tax dollars developing this stuff, so it's well done. It covers a lot of stuff. A lot of it applies to linear projects, but a lot of it is applicable to post-construction in general. So really some good information there. If you're looking for checklists, I have to refer to the Franklin County Drainage Manual. We have some checklists in there for post-construction devices. That's in need of update. We've done that quite a few years ago, and in light of the Columbus Manual has come out, if you aren't aware of that as well. The Columbus Drainage Manual has some good guidance. It doesn't have the checklist per se. It really kind of references their stormwater construction plan submittal and what makes a full submittal to them so that they can evaluate that. But it is a good document, but not if you're looking for checklists per se. OEPA and US EPA both have checklists out there. They are comprehensive. I'll give them that. You know, as you know, you look at that 138-page fact sheet from US EPA. They are comprehensive checklists, and they need to be, so they cover all the bases that are needed to be covered. Some may not be applicable to what you want to use, but you can certainly use the information to develop your own. So take a look at those. Other questions we've had about third-party inspections. You know, we've started to do, we have done a lot of that, shared some of that results with our MS4 partners. You know, but developing out that full inspection aspect of it, you know, there's some things, there's some data requirements that are needed. There's some equipment that's needed. We don't have confined space certification, nor do we want it, I think, just from an insurance standpoint. So that might be something that becomes problematic down the road. Private companies, though, you know, you've got a lot of the engineering firms already have inspectors in place for a lot of this stuff. I'm sure that's something that they can definitely supply or consider vendors of that. Land management firms, you know, these are the ultimate take carers of the properties. It might not be the owner of the BMP, but you might have these land management companies that need to do the inspections for the property owner. And that's another area of interest to us, especially to get that education out and to see what abilities they have. A lot of landscape maintenance companies, you know, they're getting into this landscaping aspect, and they're running up against these, and it's not just typical landscaping. It's knowing your native plants. It's how to take care of them. You know, what's the problems with them? You know, is there, you know, some hydrology aspects that they can work on? I think you'll see a lot more landscaping type firms get into that as well. Specific inspection services, there are companies out there that do this type of work specifically. We don't recommend companies, being, you know, somewhat of a government agency. We do kind of, we have a running list of providers. I don't use them too often. We don't update them frequently. We just kind of add to them. So it's hit or miss on our providers list. I would tend to shy away from that and look for other avenues. Like I said, third-party inspections, local SWCDs, county drainage engineers, look to those resources. They may have the abilities to do some levels of that. You know, that's definitely something we're looking at increasing and doing. But we have some things to work out. One of those things is that administrative tracking component. You know, when you think about our requirements as MS4s is, over the permit term to ensure that these are looked at once, inspected and make sure they're operating. Well, I may review a plan one year, it may be get built the next year. That puts that into the third year. We're also looking at its post-construction inspection, keeping track of that relative then to the other projects. Where are they at in this 5-year term, or have we looked at them? The logistics, the tracking component, that's a real important part of that MS4 program, is how you're going to track these and understand where they're at. When it comes to annual reporting time, EPA is asking, how many post-constructions did you look at? How many were inspected? Those numbers don't always just meet the construction site inspection NOIs that you reviewed. So that tracking has always been a little bit problematic for us. I don't know how much other problem other people have had with that, but that is definitely an administrative headache that we're trying to resolve as well.
Up again.
Last poll question.
All right.
Like I said, we are reaching the end of this. That is our last poll question. I will let everybody, we'll just open this up, and if you have questions, feel free to jump in and talk. Glad to see most everybody was finding it useful.
And if you didn't, let us know what maybe you were hoping to maybe get out of this, or if you have additional questions that we didn't, chime in and let us know what else you'd like to have us focus on.
Feedback is feedback, and it's always appreciated, whether it's good or bad.
I have a question. Is it okay to ask now?
It is, sure.
Tatiana Parfenova with Metro Parks. I wonder how so I didn't understand quite whether the new requirements in the MS4 allow to build the post-construction measures or construction measures in the watershed, but not within the boundary of the jurisdiction. And then if it is post-construction, how is that gonna function in terms of funding and implementation and timing? So do you have any more details that you could share on that, please?
Well, so my understanding from the permit language is that if you have a TMDL, that TMDL is applied to a watershed specific area, and EPA is looking for improvements in that area. It might be outside of your MS4, but you may be able to contribute funding to that project to help with that issue within that watershed. And I think that's an important step, because like I say, I know some of the communities I've talked to, they want to spend their stormwater utility fee in their community, and spending it outside of it creates some tension. So I do think it's useful looking at this from a watershed scale aspect. We'll see how applicable it is. City of Columbus does that on a broader scale because of our water supply needs. A lot of funding has gone into projects up in the Big Walnut watershed to improve agricultural runoff in our drinking water. So that, is an example of where it is possible for a municipality to spend elsewhere for the benefit of your local residents.
That makes sense. And I guess as I'm with Metro Parks, I'm wondering if we could be a receiver of those implementations or no? That's what
Yeah, I
I'm
think
wondering.
Metro Parks might be a really good example of an area that can benefit from that. If you're looking particularly for, restoration projects, stream or wetland, I do think you can almost treat it as a mitigation bank, if you will, in that respect. So good to see Metro Parks in on this, and certainly I think you as an MS4 should look at that ability there in all your parks.
So if you encounter anything like that you could forward to us, like someone has a need, because I wouldn't know how we would pursue that. I understand in general, so it could work like mitigation wetland, but.
Yeah, and calling it a mitigation bank might trigger some things that aren't exactly allowed or need additional approvals, but it certainly is a way that we can look at that more watershed scale improvement, especially in impaired systems.
Thank you.
Tatiana, would you be a point contact for anybody that might be interested in discussing that further in other communities that I could share with?
Probably forward it to other people once I get it, but I would be a good one since I'm asking the question, and it would be best to just send it to me probably. Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So Matt kind of asks an interesting question here about, do you think OEPA would require co-permitting status if one MS4's project was utilized by another? Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe OEPA is in on this and can think about that one a little bit more. I'd hate to be their voice on this one, but I think, if we're talking about restoration project, I think there's some way or need for taking credit where credit is due, certainly for projects like this. We'll have to get to that bridge and cross that at that point.
Right. It might be a question we can follow up with a couple of our contacts over at OEPA, and then maybe put that in the resources follow-up if we get a response to that question, because I think that is a very interesting way to possibly utilize that option.
So how are we doing? More questions? More comments? I think if all things go as they have been going, perhaps we'll get back more to the in-person and have a little more conversation face to face. I know the Zoom doesn't always lend itself to that conversation a little bit better.
Right, or at least be able to offer some kind of a hybrid where we can offer in person potentially and still offer that remote option for folks to join in, because I think we've gotten a lot of great participation with the virtual option. So I'd hate to see that kind of go away completely, but I think you're right. In these kinds of meetings, it is helpful to be face to face with folks and be able to interact a little more fluidly.
Next time I might be in front of a green screen with the presentation behind me, and you can either choose to watch it from where you are at or come into the office and have some conversation and pizza and lunch afterwards. So I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, virtual pizza is not very satisfying. You're correct. It'd have to, maybe we could get some DoorDash delivered for the virtual attendees.
Well, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. I know we promised 2. You're only going to get credit for 1 hour now. So that's what we'll be sending out with the certificates. I hope everybody enjoyed this, found it useful. Looks like most of you did by the survey. maybe not everybody, but that's to be expected. Can't please everybody, right?
That's true.
Yeah. So I appreciate you attending. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to contact Brooke or I. We're here to help you guys, so let us know.
Yep, absolutely.
Any final comments, Brooke?
No, I don't think so. I guess I did follow up. Most of the people that are on this list might have been involved in the email I sent out yesterday regarding that XCal training opportunity. So if you haven't already gotten me a list of employees you'd like added to that list, feel free to do that over the next few days. Probably send another email reminder out to folks next week. So, and let us know what kind of training would be helpful to you as well. We're gonna try the virtual option. I think it's a great opportunity to capture participation that way and meet a lot of those requirements, but we can still look at, obviously doing in-person events as needed. And so let us know what you need from us.
Sounds great. Once again, thanks for joining us. The next roundtable will be coming up probably
In October.
Stormwater Awareness Week. We'll have
Yep.
another roundtable during that week. So tune in then, and we'll see you till next time. Thanks again, everybody.